thank you so much to Kamal, Alexa, Loring, and to Cecilia for creating this extraordinary event.
And thank you all for being here. It's truly an honor for us to open this forum. What you've just seen are real responses from people outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Every single person overestimated the amount of work by women artists in museum collections and their share of the auction market.
We actually ran the same exercise with people inside the art world, curators, gallerists, collectors, and artists, and you might be surprised to know that they overestimated even more. And that gap between perception and reality, between visibility and sustainability, is what we're going to talk about tonight.
Why are experts more out of touch than the general public?
And why are women artists so much less likely to have their work collected by museums than their male peers?
Women are half the population, but they represent just 11% of museum acquisitions in our most recent report, and they make up an even smaller percentage of collections as a whole. Museums tell us the story of ourselves, so why are women's stories so poorly represented?
The easy answer is that this is a problem of history and that we're slowly catching up. And it's true that some museums, especially modern and contemporary ones, have made great strides towards parity in their collections. But the data shows a much more complex picture.
For instance, the peak year for museums acquiring work by women in our data was 2009. And the market data shows that at the current rate, we won't see parity in auction sales until 2053.
We're gathering data now for the next edition of the Burns Halperin report in 2027. And as preparation, we've been interviewing museum leaders across the US. We've been struck that the majority of museum leaders have raised concerns to us about a backlash against women in the field. So far, none of our male interviewees has mentioned that. Artists are feeling it too. In a survey of 1,200 female artists we conducted with Anonymous Was a Woman last year, around half said they couldn't speak freely without fear of career consequences.
Progress isn't linear. It comes in waves, and it often reverses. Art schools first reached parity in the 1940s, before slipping back until the 1980s. The Me Too movement produced a measurable spike in acquisitions for work by women in 2018, according to our data, but the numbers dipped again the next year. The perception of progress becomes its own obstacle. It tells us a comforting story, that the problem will solve itself without anyone having to change.
How many times have you read headlines, maybe written by Julia or me, proudly announcing the very first solo show by a woman artist, or the appointment of a first female director of a museum? These headlines are presented as celebrations, but what they really show is the scale and the scope of what women are often left out of. What should be a source of shame is often reframed as a story of progress.
In the end, this is all about the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we accept, whether in museums, the market, the media, or our own lives. Inevitable progress is just another story. Here are a few others we've heard.
First, that museums can't afford to rebalance their collections. But our data shows that the museums collecting the most work by women aren't the biggest spenders. It's the mid-sized institutions with budgets of around $15 to $20 million a year.
Second, that it's unrealistic to collect work by women born before 1900. In our data, several encyclopedic museums actually outperformed modern and contemporary museums in collecting work by women.
Third, the art world thinks of itself as progressive, and it is true that 60% of museum workers are women. But it still matters who is in charge. The top 4 museums in our study when it comes to collecting work by women artists were all led by women directors.
We also hear that women are underrepresented because museum boards must be all men. But when we counted, 47% were women, one of the few places in the sector where we see near parity.
This tells us that it's not about who's in the room, it's about who's committed to change, who gets listened to, whose priorities are funded, and what gets acted on.
The data shows a volume problem. Gifts from donors can dwarf purchases. For every work a museum buys with its own limited money, it accepts many more from donors.
One museum acquired more work by women than any other museum in our study in sheer volume. But work by women still made up just 5% of its total acquisitions. This reflects a broader trend, a lack of concerted focus and strategy.
But we can also see what happens when an institution sets a clear priority and gets its board and staff behind it. The Dia Art Foundation's collection started as nearly all white and nearly all male. But since Jessica Morgan became director in 2015, 63% of its acquisitions have been by women artists, an increase of more than 280%. And I think all of us would agree the museum's program is all the more interesting for it.
This kind of change is not universally admired. As the late curator Okwi Enwezor told me once, you can spot the code words used to push back against it. And we'll hear a lot more about that over the forum.
One of those code words is quality, but quality doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. The Oxford professor Renee Adams, who you'll hear from later in the forum, ran an experiment. People were shown computer-generated paintings attributed to either men or women. Affluent gallery goers, especially men, rated the same art as less compelling when told it was by a woman. The more involved someone was in the art world, the greater their discrimination.
You'll hear that the market for women is growing, and that's true to some extent. Still, recent data puts women at just 14% of the auction market in 2024. And the market for women is also dangerously concentrated. The top 5 women at auction account for nearly 40% of their entire market.
And the clearest reality check from our own report, more money has been spent at auction on one dead man, Pablo Picasso, than on all women artists combined across all periods and genres.
We began our research in the wake of Me Too, when public support for women was surging, and museum acquisitions of work by women briefly rose with it. 2018, the centenary of women's suffrage, also brought a wave of women's empowerment programming across the art world. But the symbolism often outpaced the substance. We found one particularly stark example on the Department of Justice's website, an invitation to an exhibition of women artists celebrating the centenary sent to none other than Jeffrey Epstein.
We can see that lack of care in the data. The 5th most collected female artist in museum collections is anonymous or unknown. Their work was collected, but their names were never recorded.
The art world does not exist in a vacuum. The 11% or so figure shows up across different sectors: Fortune 500 CEOs, film directors, AI researchers.
Just to offer a window into what the future looks like with only 12% AI researchers, this image on the screen is what comes up when you Google women AI art.
One of the things we hear most often is that change takes time, but women don't have time to wait for change that may or may not come.
In our 2025 survey for Anonymous Was a Women, women artists reported working roughly a third more hours per week than the average American woman. Yet they spent less than half that time actually making art.
The numbers do show that one way to get into museums as a woman artist is simply to outlive your male peers. By the time the Whitney Museum showed the Giesbend quilters in 2002, the 67-year-old Mary Lee Bendorf said she just wished her mother, a visionary quilter in her own right, had lived to see it. The breakout star at the Whitney Biennial right now is the 92-year-old Carmen de Monteflores. The wall label notes, "Frustrated by the lack of opportunities for women in the art world, de Monteflores stopped painting in 1969. Our data cannot capture the many women artists who have left the field entirely, who have never seen their work valued.
The systems that have held women artists back can change. New ways of telling stories are emerging, and some of that change is coming from collectors, patrons, and board members. Women now control more than a third of global wealth, a figure that will only rise, and the latest Art Basel UBS report found that they spend 46% more than men on art. For some of these women, that represents an opportunity to rethink the system entirely.
And this shift isn't only happening at the top. Different models are already being built from the ground up by artists themselves. They know firsthand that the traditional systems aren't always serving them. Almost 2/3 of women artists say that a lack of museum and institutional backing hinders their careers. Over half feel the same way about galleries. Where they are finding success and support is overwhelmingly with one another.
There are so many new and interesting ways to tell these stories, and so many people in this room who are already doing that invaluable work. We started the Burns Halperin report as 2 journalists setting out to write 2 articles. Now we're part of a broad constellation of around 40 advisors, data analysts, and researchers. And together we're building new systems, including a storytelling machine database that we can't wait to tell you more about.
At its heart, all of this data just tells us more about people. The artists who make the work, the museum directors who lead with conviction, the curators who create new scholarship, the board members who make things possible. The future gets built by people like the ones in this room, and it gets built in conversation like the ones we're going to have this weekend. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you, Kamal, for gathering us in one place.